Hello and welcome to The Exchange.
Today we'll be discussing an issue that we all face at some point in our lives: loss.
Whether it's the loss of a friendship, a dream or a loved one, loss is something that we all need to come to terms with.
You can lose a variety of things in your life: your teeth, your cat, your home, or even someone close to you. Loss is a certainty in life. No one can expect to go through life without having to cope with losing something or someone close to them. But how can people manage to triumph and grow through these times? How can we move forward despite our grief?
Joining us is Andrew Darbyshire, who's a self-made business leader as well as an author and philanthropist. Andrew is also a member of the Order of Australia. He's experienced what it's like to win, but also to lose tragically. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Rob.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Also on the panel is Michal deWilloughby, who is a senior counsellor and educator at the Australian Centre of Grief and Bereavement. Welcome, Michal. Great to have you. Now, Andrew, you experienced probably one of the worst personal situations that anyone could face just under 10 years ago. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it was the loss of our daughter, who was 8.5 at the time, and it was shocking, but it wasn't. It was unexpected, but it happened, and you lived through it.
And yes, you say you lived through it, but at the time, can you remember the impact that it had? Were you aware that it was going to happen, or was it a sudden situation?
It was reasonably sudden. We knew it was going to happen at some point in time, from about the Christmas, and she passed away in the August. And what was, I guess, shocking from my point of view was that I went to Auckland on the way to North America, and I was in Auckland on the flight, and I thought I'd just check in with my wife, and she said, "I can't talk now, Caitlin's not very well, give me a call when you get to LA." And I'd kissed Caitlin goodbye on the Sunday, and she went to school on the Monday, and what I didn't know was my wife Catherine was with Caitlin at a school, Glen Allen Special School, and she could hear ambulances in the background coming, and I couldn't, and so I just assumed, she was not well. And about 3 hours into the flight, I had this instinctive gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. So I picked up the phone and the armrest and slid my credit card through and called home. And a friend was there and said, "You need to talk to Catherine urgently. She's at the Children's Hospital with Caitlin." And I rang her there, and she said, "Caitlin's dying. You need to come home." At that stage, I was heading the wrong way across the Pacific. And that was, in some respects, fortunate because Caitlin had a brain tumour and she had special needs. She never spoke. She was a beautiful child. Jealousy and anger and all those sort of things just didn't exist in her nature and her personality. And she was a very pretty girl. But because I was away and she was at the Children's Hospital, Catherine begged them to keep her alive until I got home because I flew in that morning, flew out that night, went straight to the Children's Hospital, and because they did that in such a radical way with steroids and dehydrating her, the tumour shrunk enough that we actually had 5 weeks of her at home and had time to prepare ourselves. But you still can't. A very good friend of mine was there when she passed away in the evening that night, which was about 7 o'clock at night, and he says he's never experienced wailing like we did, but I can't remember that.
That's just
it just didn't happen.
Grief.
Yeah. And it takes a good 5 years to get over it. You never get over it, but to actually
work through that process.
Yeah, to stop waking up in the middle of the night.
Talking about the process of bereavement, Michal, if I can just bring you in at that point. Sometimes you hear people talk about the 5 stages of grief. Other people say it's more of an individual thing. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think we've kind of, as much as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was amazing for her time, we've kind of moved past seeing that grief and bereavement is a stage-based process. It is a really incredible individual thing, and we really acknowledge that in every single person. Everyone will do it their own way. I think everyone experiences the full range of emotions, but they do it in their own way, in their own time, and in any length of time. You know, there's kind of no end to saying, look, it's going to happen and you'll finish it in 1 or 2 years. You know, you were talking about 5 years, you know, and I think that's probably a reasonable length of time when you start to think, oh, maybe life's starting to look like, you know, I'm starting to look at it in a different kind of way. You're not so overwhelmed by it.
And Andrew mentioned acute grief, which is wailing, which we've certainly explained. So maybe list some of the other things that acute grief brings, that because some people are shocked because they've never experienced grief. So what would some of the other symptoms of acute grief be?
Yeah. I think anyone who's experienced a bereavement right at the beginning are experiencing acute grief. And once again, it depends on the kind of relationship that, you know, that the loss, what kind of loss you've had. But I think acute grief is, I don't know if you can remember some of these, you know, like fog brain. You know, people just can't remember anything. The shock and numbness, like they feel like they can't feel their body. And some people say, I'm really surprised right at the beginning how well I'm doing. But that's because right at the beginning there's so many things that they have to do, organising funerals, telling people, trying to get through that first little while of...
And you can feel quite numb anyway, can't you? Like the reality hasn't really sunk in.
Exactly. And there's, I think a lot of people don't sleep very well. They have a change in their appetite. A lot of, if there's been a traumatic edge to it, a lot of people remember those last moments and the look on the face of their loved ones. So, you know, there's a full range of things in there. So they get a lot of dreams that come back to them. They get a lot of revisitations of that time. So you know, there's a full range in there. And from one person to the next, it can be, they can have just one, none, or all of those symptoms.
And with Andrew, with you, what do you recall was the first step towards... obviously you never get over it, as people say, you get over it, but the first step towards being able to move on with your future?
I didn't stop moving on with my future. It was just, I was waking up in the middle of the night, and I spoke to a friend who lost his daughter at the age of 12 through an asthma attack, and I think it was about the 4-year mark, and he said after about 5 years it starts to settle down. It was almost to the day it did start to settle down, but I think you go through, and also for us, it was a continual grieving up until that point, because Caitlin was diagnosed when she was 3 months old. So, you know, she had the brain tumour, she had epilepsy, she had learning difficulties, and all those sort of things that went along with it.
Right.
And so, and then adding to the experience is other people's reactions, which is often deplorable. You know, people that you haven't seen for years come out of the woodwork, more for, I think, their own self-fulfilment, and other people behave appallingly, and some people just go along with it for you. And there was, you know, in our case, there was a lot of people that were surprisingly, you know, very strong and supportive, and other people that weren't. So, but I don't believe in life you can ever look back. You've always got to be moving forward. If you're failing forward, then you're failing. If you're not failing, you're not moving forward, and that's really the formula for success in anything, and in getting over experiences. And it doesn't mean that you're any hardened by it. It was funny. Last week I was actually in Santa Barbara and saw all the in the little town. I've forgotten the name of it now. Near Santa Barbara University, UCL, Santa Barbara, and the think that, you know, 2 weeks beforehand a lunatic was driving around there at 80 miles an hour in very narrow, pretty beach town. We've heard about all the people that were killed, but there were lots of people maimed by his driving, and there was lots of flowers, and, you know, a little deli where a girl was shot. And I was thinking, imagine getting that phone call.
Yeah, awful.
Right. Where with Caitlin, she had a genetic condition that we had 8.5 years of acceptance of.
So you had all of that time to prepare yourself for it. Michal, why is death such a taboo subject? Why do we feel so uncomfortable talking about these things?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question, I think. And we talk a lot about this in the groups we run, and of course in counselling sessions. And I think we've really got to the point in our society where, you know, we've done a lot of hard things. Talk about just Australia. We do have a mindset where it is about getting over things, and, you know, we're the great Aussie battlers.
Yeah.
We soldier on.
Should be right, mate.
That's right.
Yep.
And so I think we have a bit of a mindset about, you know, all the hard things, we just move on and get your stiff upper lip. And I think, therefore, it makes death, which is sort of, the one thing that everyone can expect in life, the one thing you don't look forward to, and you have to avoid at all costs. And so we do things like try and be as youthful for as long as possible. You know, we do things like keep someone from dying for as long as possible, and so we do lots of things that will limit us looking at that, because I think it's such a big, scary thing. It's a big taboo subject that no one wants to talk about.
Which is a shame, because I found when you do talk about it, people actually want to be able to open up. We need to take a break, but we'll be back with Street Talk and more right after this.
How do you deal with disappointment or loss?
Mainly with the family. Talk, get together, get over it.
I do meditation, and that helps, so
Yes.
I find that's really good.
Probably find somebody I was comfortable with to talk it out.
I really just kind of, focus on what happened, think about it, and, weigh out my options. You have two choices, basically, whenever you lose something, whether it's a personal item or a family member, and, you have to move forward, or you can kind of fall down and deal with it in grief.
I tend to surround myself with family and friends to help me through it and get their support to sort of give you the light to kind of keep going, and the path to keep going, and the strength.
Spend time with friends and, rightly or wrongly, drink a bit.
I just kind of get through it, and I haven't really had much disappointment at all, so it's pretty simple.
In my particular case, I usually stay by myself thinking, and maybe just talking with some friends, and try to see the reason why I lose something and what can I do to be a better person without this thing or this feeling or this person.
I definitely go to friends and family for support. I think that's the first thing I do when I come across that kind of thing. Yeah.
Depending what it is, I like to keep it to myself for a while and nest over it, and then probably see how I feel about it and take it from there, then talk about it with friends.
Yep.
Most likely family as well.
Well, sometimes I just stay in my room alone and just cry, maybe.
I usually just bottle it up and think that I have better things to do than just cry, and I just get over it.
If you find that it's going for a long period of time, do you still rely on your family for that?
Yes, very much so.
So you draw on them for positivity?
Yeah, absolutely, because they're the people around you that know you the best and know what to say, know what kind of mood you're in, and can kind of pull you out, or just let you be in it if you need to sit in there for a little while.
How do you get over it?
Just go on. Don't pay attention to it much if you don't like it.
So ignore it?
Pretty much.
Welcome back. We're discussing dealing with loss positively with philanthropist and businessman Andrew Darbyshire and bereavement counsellor Michal deWilloughby. And Sandra, our Street Talk reporter, joins us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi,
Great to be here.
Sandra. How did you find it?
Oh, look, pretty much what I heard from you guys mentioning before, that everyone deals with grief and loss differently and personally, but overwhelmingly, support, family support and friends, someone to talk to was the key thing that kept on coming back to me, having a good support system. And, I guess it's key.
It is.
I guess
they say people do a lot better. That's what the research shows us. People do a lot better when they're really supported by family and friends, if they've got a good support network. Yeah.
Is that what you found in your own experience?
Yeah, and a sense of purpose, and a reason to respect the life that has passed.
Which is why you've started some of the foundations that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly, precisely.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the first and probably the most impactful thing that Caitlin's life, and Caitlin, I believe, has on society is the Children's Hospital. Is the first and only children's hospital at this stage in the world with a zoo within it. And that was a vision that came to me one day in 2001 when she'd had 10 and a half hours of surgery. And I looked out the window of the ward across Royal Park in the old hospital and thought, hang on, there's a zoo across there and there's children here, why aren't they together? And lots of lobbying and lots of speed humps along the way with politicians and bureaucracy and just generally just pushing people. The new hospital opened by the Queen with a meerkat enclosure, which is apparently has a huge impact on the children that are there. They actually want to go to the hospital to see the meerkats. And it wasn't easy. Like the hospital had to become a registered zoo because of the fact that meerkats are feral animals. That then led to me being on the Zoo's Victoria Foundation for a couple of years. I was on the Florey Neuroscience Foundation Council and set up a fund at the Florey called Caitlin's Fund at the Florey, which is awarded once a year, a fellowship to 2 scientists to present a paper overseas. I was the chairman of CAPRA, Child Abuse Prevention Research at Monash University, which we started the whole investigation into the Catholic Church in Victoria. I was on the Song Room board for a couple of years, and I established Caitlin's Retreat, which is a respite facility for special needs children and their families out at Eltham. It's a big house on about 5 acres of land on the banks of the Yarra, and families go out there for some time together, and for the siblings particularly, it gives them a positive experience from their brother or sister, which they wouldn't get very often.
Those are quite extensive purpose. Yes. What about people who maybe wouldn't have Andrew's business acumen? How can they put a little bit of purpose or a lot of purpose behind the loss of a loved one?
Yeah, and I think it does depend from one person to the next. It does take some people a while to make some sense of their loss. But I think when they get to the point, you know, a lot of people get to a point where they can make some sense of the loss and then find some meaning and even some benefit finding. But that does come for a lot of people further down the track, especially if there's been a traumatic edge. And a lot of people do it in their own ways. I think, you know, it's amazing what you've been able to do. But, you know, that's right. But some people, they write their own books. Someone I know who's been one of our support groups, he also started up some foundations after his wife died, and other people go and help other people. They become volunteers in other organisations. So everyone does it really, really different, because I think the one thing I find across a lot of them is they want to give back. It's impacted on their life so much, they want to give something back. So whether it be small or little.
Like it opens their eyes to celebrating life. Like, to me, that's what you've done, is almost like celebrating the life of what Caitlin has brought, and wanting to give that to other children and other people.
Oh, so, absolutely.
So it almost opens that.
It's leverage in her life. Her 8.5 years have probably impacted more people than most people do in their lifetime.
Entire lifetime.
Yeah, and that's her impact, not my impact.
It's her legacy.
It makes you realise as well how brief life is, and making every moment count.
Absolutely.
Really important. Sandra, thank you for popping in.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. We'll be back with more on The Exchange right after this. Welcome back. We're chatting on how to deal with loss positively.
Yes, indeed. From your experience, Andrew, I'll ask you first, what are some of the positive things that give people hope that can help them on that journey? What would you say greatest tips?
I think the number one tip is to accept, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a material item, a contract, any of those, certainly an important employee, it is what it is, and accept it. And it's not going to change, and mulling it over is, we all mull over, me in particular. I always look at ways and means of doing it better, but accept what it is and fall forward. And at the moment, I've got a particularly challenging time in my business because I'm changing a lot, and I've got to fail fast. If you fail slow, then you'll end up in a lot of trouble. If you fail fast, you can correct it and change and keep moving forward, and you'll eventually find the solution. And even people, you know, icons like Steve Jobs, and Rupert Murdoch, they fail hugely all the time, but they keep on falling forwards and failing forward.
Yeah, that's great.
And failing fast, I like that.
Failing fast,
what
I like
would you
that.
add to that, Michal?
I think I'm a big believer in the organicity principle when it comes to people. Like, trust that you've got the answer within yourself, and if people around you can help support you in that, people can either help or hinder you in your process. So if they want to be helpful, then support what you want to do. As long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting other people, then if people can support you doing what you need to do for your own grief journey, then I would say that's a big part of it all.
And what do we do if we're grieving loss and people are not handling it well? I remember, and I've seen this many times over the years, but one example stands out very clearly when I used to be a midnight to dawn radio announcer, and of course you get all sorts of people ring in, and this young girl rang in. She was about 21. She'd been diagnosed with a brain tumour, and she only had a few months to live, but her parents wouldn't speak to her. They didn't know how to deal with it, so they distanced themselves. How do you encourage in that?
Yep.
Sort of a situation.
And I guess you can't force people, because people, they'll deal with it in so many different kinds of ways. You know, in that case of that poor young lass, you know, once again, if she'd had been supported by other people, then that's really, really good. But once again, kind of trusting your own intuitive journey, because it's a big uncertainty no matter what kind of loss you're experiencing. I think uncertainty is what you're facing, and it's about moving forward in a way that you trust within yourself, and don't let someone else tell you what that looks like. Yep.
Andrew, would you add anything to that?
I think often
when people handle things badly.
Yeah, well, the people tend to cross the road often.
Because they don't know how to deal with it?
No, and they don't want to expose their emotions. They're probably hurt and upset and don't want to expose themselves to it. And maybe in that girl's case, her parents were so hurt they didn't want to scratch the surface. But it also sounds like there was probably more to the story than she was prepared to share with you.
There could well be, although we spent many hours speaking on the phone at 2 or 3 in the morning. And how should you look after yourself during those times? When you're grieving, you're going through a grief process about you've lost something. How should you look after yourself? What about self-care?
And I think it's about, you know, rightly or wrongly, what's the definition of doing it well? So I think we really need to look at that the definition of what looks well for one is not going to look well for somebody else. Going back to that young lady whose parents wouldn't talk to her, they were probably dealing with it in the best way they knew how to. It may not have been helpful to her in the long run for sure. But I think it's what's well. I go back to, as long as it's not hurting yourself or somebody else, then, you know, then that you're actually working with it. Rather than working against it, because I think that's where things go wrong, is when you're actually fighting up against a process that's really natural and normal. It's a part of our human experience. It's part of our full range of emotions. It's grief.
Yeah, I think that applies to most things in life, actually. As long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, that doesn't matter. There are no rules. But there is a lot of perceived rules.
Correct.
And sheep mentality.
And cliches.
Yeah.
You've had lots of cliches, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do platitudes. Don't do platitudes. People hate them.
It said to me, oh, that's best. Then you go, fine, might be for you.
Yes, wasn't your daughter.
No,
Anyway, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Michal, for coming in and joining us on The Exchange. It's been very helpful discussion today. And if you go to our website, you'll find a fact sheet on today's program that will guide you to many resources that will help you if you're dealing with loss and grief personally, or if you know someone who has. We hope you can join us again next week, same time, same channel for The Exchange.
See you then.